I just realized that we weren't live this whole time. So I've been painting, talking, blah, blah, blah. I guess I've recorded it onto my device here, but none of that will make it into this video on right now. Anyway, maybe afterwards I'll upload the original video. That's frustrating. What was I thinking? I guess it was because earlier, right before we began, I was doing another episode, and so I guess I was just out of my normal routine here. Anyway, thank you to those of you I see that have been waiting patiently for me to begin. Just to kind of catch you up on what you may have missed, is I transferred the image onto the canvas. I've shown how to do that in previous episodes. You can watch any of the other episodes to show how I transferred the drawing onto the canvas. And then I just applied some cool red, magenta red, all over the canvas here. And that's basically where we're at right now. So I was wondering why no one was commenting in the chat. Usually the chat's very active. Anyway, okay. So I'm going to blow dry this, and then I'm going to start painting on top here. Okay, so I see there's Deborah in the chat. Thank you again for people who are very patient with me. The reason why Deborah says, why did you choose magenta, Michael? And what I was, in the first half hour of the episode that was not live because I've just spaced out clearly. What I was doing is I zoomed in on the image, and I was kind of looking around just as a kind of detective to see if I could identify what the process that Yoshitomo Nara used to create this image. And so I kind of looked around, and often kind of where two colors meet, we sometimes see the residue underneath here. And so I kind of saw in a few places that there's this kind of red showing through rather than yellow or brown. It seemed to me kind of like this magenta coming through, like underneath this here. I think particularly in the face is where I saw that. So I'm not entirely sure that that's what he did. But just sort of using my detective work, I thought, you know what? I think probably that red would work, because one of the big features of Yoshitomo Nara's work is this slightly uncomfortable, strange feeling that we get when we look at his paintings. That often they feature these children that are often described as menacing figures, even though they're relatively straightforward. But you know, there is this kind of child just sort of sitting in this space with a kind of an angry look, and there's a little bit of redness around the lips, and so we're kind of like, why is there redness around the lips? Is it just because he's just a grumpy kid who's been sucking on his soother or her soother or their soother for a long time, like any child? Or is there something potentially a little bit more sinister happening here? Maybe is this a vampire child? So I think it's really interesting just to kind of think about like how, like why people look at images like this and feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I think one of the things that Yoshitomo Nara could be using is using a color like a pink underneath here that we may not see much of or anything of afterwards, but as it leaks through in these little, parts, that might be something that we kind of pick up unconsciously as we look at it. And so artists are always thinking about like, what do I want to say? And then how can I use my materials to help me say it best, right? So that I don't have to be standing there right next to the painting and people like, oh, what a cute painting. And you're like, oh no, this is supposed to be a kind of a creepy painting. You're like, oh, really? Because so if that was the reaction people got and he didn't want it, but he still wanted to paint it this kind of using the outline, right? So if we begin with the outline, then how could we, so that he would probably start thinking, well, maybe I've got to modify my colors or do things underneath the colors to create effects that would give that slightly uncanny quality to the painting. So just as a, let's just kind of take a quick little break here. I did mention, well, it's recorded onto my computer here, but I think it's not on the live version of today's episode. But if you want to transfer this image onto your canvas, there is a Dropbox link below. You click on that Dropbox link, and it'll take you. You see all the different paintings you could possibly do here. And the one that we're working on here is number 22, Yoshitomo Nara. You've got the original image, and then you've got the tracing, and then you can use some graphite paper to transfer it onto the canvas. Again, I've kind of demonstrated how all that's done. But when you're all done, you can upload your painting to this private Facebook group here. And I would love to see your version of the paintings. So here's Charmaine's version of the Chi by Chi painting that we did last week. Very cool. I love these. It was so cool. I'm super excited. Here's Dolores's version. Oh my goodness, that is cool. This is Amrita Shergill's painting, the Sumer. Right, here's a couple versions of the Yayoi Kusuma. Right, so there's tons of work here by other people, maybe just like you, if you're tuning in for the very first time. Let's take a quick look at Yoshitomo Nara's bio. I didn't realize that he was 61. I thought he was a little bit younger, closer to my own age. Not that I'm a particularly young guy, but it's not so, now that as soon as I was like, oh, it's not surprising that he's a little bit older, because he's been, as I saw that, like since 1984 he's been at it. So he's really more of that like 80s generation of artists, when most people, I think, including myself, who are very familiar with the work, would probably think of him more as like a late 90s kind of individual. So he's one of those guys that was like obviously an early, very successful, very early in his life. If you're interested, if you live down in the Southern California, there's a huge exhibition of his art up right now in Los Angeles at the LA County Museum of Art, LACMA. And I used to live not too far away from LACMA for almost a decade, and LACMA is going through a huge renovation right now, so it'd be really interesting. Is there any exhibition photos in here? One thing, just as a quick little aside here, it's interesting that there's an exhibition soundtrack that you can listen to while you're walking through the show. So you can click on the Spotify playlist, and it has all the songs in here that he suggests listening to while you look at the work. Obviously, I can't play any of this right now, or this video will get taken down, but there is a link to it in the video description below. And here's a LA Weekly article on it. And anyway, so there's lots of material. Go through a second time, even though really for everyone it's really the first time. But okay, so let's get back to the painting here and think about what we need to do next. Let's put this here and here. I knew there had to be something wrong because everything was going so right. Okay, so we've got this kind of strange glowing magenta. It looks kind of neon, especially when we put some water into to thin it out, because now it kind of optically mixes with the white of the canvas. So it is really bright. Now we're going to cover it with all these other colors, which are going to significantly reduce the brightness of that, but it's going to kind of be leaking through, and I think giving it that menacing kind of quality that reminds me of like Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, perhaps, right? The blood coming out of the elevator. So where should we begin? I think if I look at the, really the only choices in my mind is, should we start with the background or go right to the foreground? And that's always, I think it always kind of, it never really matters too much, but I'm going to suggest we do I think let's do a coat on the background, and then we'll paint the foreground, and we may need to do another coat on the background here. So let's get some more paint on our palette here. We won't need too much of some of these colors, so it probably was a little bit too much warm red on there, but the color that we're going to put around, so this would be interesting to think about what color that background color could be. So we've painted a cool, oops, that was a lot of yellow. We painted a cool red in the background, which means if we painted a warm color over top of it, that red, the cool color underneath, would kind of balance it out, would help reduce, it'll still kind of, even though we've got a warm color on top, we've got a cool color underneath, and it's still going to kind of want to pull it towards the middle ground, hopefully in behind this character. Because as I talked about in our intro to painting class, like we can use the color temperatures to help create space and depth in our paintings. Okay, so let's put some white on here. I think what we might do is maybe do a few coats, thinner coats of this white, because I don't want to just obliterate the white. I want to keep, or the pink magenta color, I don't want to obliterate it, because we put it there for a reason, but we also don't want it to be super transparent. So it's always kind of a bit of it's this mixing game here. So looking at that color, that is a, that is, it looks like a yellow and a cool yellow and white, but I'm not 100% sure. So much so that I think what I might do is take a quick little search here, and let's upload I'm going to upload this file to this website. There's a link in the description. I think on like color picking. So let's just kind of click down here. You can see this is the image. Just bring, oops, come on. Just kind of explain how this works. So I upload the image to this website, and I can click around and you can see the colors changing over here, right? So we're all in this vicinity. So I'm going to copy this hex number. Hex number is like a number that designers use to get the color for use in like printing and color matching on computers. Anyway, so I input it in here, and this tells me a few things. First of all, it tells me that there's a lot of white, which is not obvious. It's not, which is pretty obvious, but maybe for some people it can be a little bit hard to kind of decipher what color is what. The other thing that I'm actually a little bit surprised about is this color has is much warmer color than I expected it to be. I expected this color to be a little bit more on the cool side, and if we were down here, but if this color was a cool yellow, so let's say we put this in a cool yellow. Come on, cool yellow, and then we add a bunch of white to it. That's the color we would get. Versus, what was this color? This color was more on the warm side. So I know this is kind of super geeky and technical, but for people who really want to match that color, you would want to, this would be something interesting to consult. Now, however, we are painting over top of the red. So we have a little bit of optical color mixing and the color we're putting on top. And I don't want to overcomplicate all this, but I do want people to have some insight into how I figure things out, right? So I still am going to suggest that we use a bit of the cooler color, and then we're going to mix it with a little bit of blue. You can see this is the opposite color here. So it's actually a bit more of a, it's got a bit of a brownish kind of quality to it. All right. So, anyway, so let's mix this color, and we'll see how close we can actually get on the canvas itself. So I'm going to take a little bit of my warm red, or warm yellow, and my cool yellow, and mix those together. I think we're going to need a bunch of it. Okay, and now I'm going to take some white, a big kind of scoop of it. Let's just mix this here. Let's see how close we got here. We need a bit more white in there. Now we're pretty close. I'm going to take a tiny, well, you know what? If I put blue in there right now, I have a feeling it's going to go pretty green. So you know what? I think I am going to leave it like this, and we'll see what our results are. Now, before I paint this, I'm actually going to use a little bit of my glazing medium to thin it out a bit. Not, yeah, just a little bit. Okay. So let's apply this paint across the surface here. Mine's significantly more yellowish, right? But as I said, I'm probably going to do another layer of paint anyway, so I can lighten this up. just saw at the corner of my eye people starting to tune in. I apologize for the confusion. Okay. You can see I'm just using one of my larger brushes for this. As I said, this is just the first real layer of paint here, so I'm not too concerned about getting it, kind of perfect. Okay. So actually having a little bit more of a slightly more transparent color like this is actually going to work fairly well, because when we put another coat of white that's slightly different over top of it, we will still see maybe, hopefully, a little, like 2% of this pink kind of shining through. Okay. The thing I'm going to do, like especially when I get closer, putting the other colors over here, I'm going to be fairly laissez-faire, I guess, about how perfect I am, quote unquote, about matching up. I'm going to leave a little bit of space around that area. Okay. Okay. So yeah, I'll post the full video later on this evening. That has the first half an hour of the class in there. But if you just started, kind of where the videos began, you really haven't missed a lot. I did kind of pretty much cover a lot of the things that I mentioned earlier. Okay. So, really all we've done to this stage is we had a white canvas, put some gesso on it and sanded the gesso down to get a nice smooth surface. We transferred the drawing using carbon paper from the printout that's available on the Dropbox. And then we put the cool red magenta on there, which is a little bit of water, just covered the whole surface. And then we just mixed this paint, this yellow that I just put on the top, and that's exactly where we are right now. I did my kind of usual spiel, kind of talking about a little bit of art history and everything, but anyway. So, the other thing, again, is it's really interesting. Remember when I mixed that color, it looked, within about 10% of, it looked pretty close to what we see on the left. But when I painted it on top of this red, it changed instantly, right? Which is always a reminder that, you know, if you have a color you start with, when you put paint over top of that, it changes. And if you're using this method, which is, you know, the most widely used method by professional artists, professional painters, and it's really the traditional way that artists have been painting for hundreds and hundreds of years. It does make it a little bit trickier when you're mixing paint, because if you're like, oh, well, I mixed it, it looks perfect on my palette, and then I paint it onto the canvas, and then it changes, because essentially it's mixing with the color that's already there. It's like, oh my goodness, this is so confusing, it's so hard, like, I have a hard enough time mixing it right on the palette, never mind having it mix again optically when it goes over top of a color like pink, right? Which I totally understand, and it's hard for me to get it right. Obviously, this was not the color I expected it to result, but it's not the end of the world. And you probably will never get it right off the bat. That's why I'm always suggesting over and over, don't worry about those first few layers of paint that you put down. Don't worry about getting it perfect, because the likelihood that it's going to be perfect once it's actually on the canvas is maybe 5%, right? Maybe you have this incredible eye for color or great beginner's luck and you nail it the first time. That's great. But for 95% of the time, it's going to be wrong. So don't obsess about making it perfect. We want to get these, you know, the rain, like a version of that hue on here, and then we're going to modify it as we go, right? And I also think that makes it really interesting, because every painting is going to look a little bit different. Okay, so this is still a little bit wet. I'm going to blow dry it just so that the paint, I'm not going to mix too much of this color, and I don't want to get my sleeve or my hand on this painting. Coolness. So, Sue says, the magenta took me by surprise. I thought we would use a buttermilk color. Yeah, you know, again, I would say, like, when we look at this, I think that's immediately the color you think is here, but even when we zoom into just, like, we can see there's some kind of other color he's mixing. I'm not saying he definitely used magenta. That's just my little detective work that I feel is happening when we look really at the edges of things. And then it's also, if you're just sort of looking at this flat color, it doesn't feel like he just painted this, you know, that buttermilk color, as you say, directly. Oops, come on. Why is that not? Oh, there we go. It doesn't feel like that color was just applied directly on there. It feels like there's more layers of, at least one other layer of paint underneath it. Okay. So how about what should we do next? Maybe let's do the skin here and try to match, well, not even match, just get something on there that we can then use. So to do that, I'm going to go back to our maybe more traditional method here, and I'm going to use some warm colors, right? So to kind of pull this figure a little bit further forward, because right now we've got a cool magenta and predominantly a cool yellow. So that's going to help push this backwards. We want the figure to pop forwards a little bit more. So I'm going to take some of my warm yellow, and I'm going to take some of the warm red, mix this together. So we're going to make a brown, a warm brown. So we've got an orange here. And the color on the opposite side of the color wheel is going to be blue. And you have a choice between warm blue or cool blue. Generally, you want to mix like the warm blue into it. And so we've got this kind of sandy orange brown. And I'm going to use some more white. So let's squeeze some more white onto the canvas. Or to the palette. Okay, so here's some white. Let's just mix this in here. Let's see what this looks like. Looks pretty good. I'm going to just put a little bit more white in here. You know, obviously if you feel if it's too yellow, then just add a little bit more red or blue. If you feel it's too purpley, then add more yellow and potentially red. It kind of it's kind of hard to know. It's one of those instinctive things you get from just doing it many, many, many times. Okay. So if I paint this color on here right now, it's going to go quite dark. So I'm going to put a little bit more white in there and a little bit more yellow, because remember, it's like we're going to add, when we paint it, it's like we're adding it's like red being mixed directly into the color already. So actually I'm going to add a little bit more white. I'm afraid when I paint it over there, it's going to be really dark, so we can always lighten it up, but the better we can be at this stage, the better, right? So let's paint this in here. And you're probably like, whoa, that's basically looks a lot like the color we painted in the background. Which is not that far off. Okay. I just painted over the nostrils and the mouth. If you're really afraid of losing them, you could paint them with some black or something first. Okay. So again, this is not the exact right color that I ultimately want, but it's a start, right? Okay, just get us a little slightly smaller brush. I think one of the things that helps kind of separate his art from manga and anime is that he's using it in a way, a very traditional way of painting. And anime and manga, which I love, by the way, huge fan, and at school we talk about it all the time in classes because most of my students are young and are obsessed with manga. But you know, using this kind of traditional method of painting, kind of these layers of paint, I think give it a kind of complexity that we don't see necessarily often in the artwork of manga and anime. And that's not, I'm not deriding some of the great artists like Ito and Miyazaki and my goodness, my mind is blank. It's just that often that work is often seen as like very very simple and straightforward and lacking a certain amount of depth, I guess. Visually, not necessarily in the stories or anything else, but visually, especially because like some manga comics can be like 1,000 pages, right? They're drawn often quite quickly. So there's not necessarily that much detail in the images. So I think his paintings offer something a little bit different, where there's this kind of added complexity in here. Okay, so again, these colors are a little bit different, but we're not done yet, right? We're still getting warmed up. We're just putting down the basic colors that we're going to need to make this painting. Okay, so what should we do next? Okay, I'm going to wash this brush off that I used to mix the skin tone. We're just going to keep on moving. I'm going to do the hair next. So we're just going to mix. I probably should have done this first before I made that skin tone, but so I'm just going to put a bit of warm yellow down there. Okay, so I got my warm yellow on my brush. Let's take some of the warm red and then brown, or the warm blue, and then we can make a brown. And we can change how dark it is just by adding more yellow and red to this color. All right, and there we are. We're pretty close right there, right? So you can see still a lot of that magenta coming through in this layer. I'm painting fairly thin, which is kind of how I paint anyway, but you might actually just like the hair kind of like this. It looks a little funny on camera, but in person it looks a little bit better. But I'm going to put another layer over top of it. Right now it's a bit more on the reddish side because we have that red coming through, unsurprisingly, right? Maybe we'll let that dry. While it's drying, let's do the blue, and then we'll come back and do everything all over again. In fact, we'll even do that the eyes as well. So I can still see the nose and everything coming through here. So this blue, that blue looks like a cold blue with some white in it. So let's just clean. So I believe it's probably like something like this, some white, a little bit of blue, and then a little bit of yellow. So how close are we? Pretty good. Maybe a little bit more cool yellow. And it doesn't even really matter how close it looks here, because just watch, when I put it down on top of this, it's going to go maybe a little bit purpley, right? So we're pretty close. It's actually, because I put a lot of white into that color, it's not modifying too much, or the magenta's not modifying it too much. Okay. All right, so you see how, especially as the color dries, it gets a little bit more transparent. Paint always tends to be a little bit darker when you put it on, and then as it dries, it tends to lighten up and get a little bit more transparent. So I'm not surprised by anything that's happening here. Oh, I forgot that little bit of paint under her chin there. Let's get that before this. Ha. Sometimes this happens where you miss a little something. Okay. So, you know, I'm quite confident if I was to paint that blue, like blow dry and paint it again, it would be pretty much exactly what we see on camera or on the computer screen right now, the original. Deborah says, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to go. This afternoon I was on my new board that Richard got me. I'm completely wiped out. First time this season. I'm looking forward to doing this later. Good night, everyone. Okay, good night, Deborah. Thanks for helping me out there, letting people know that we were actually live and my folly with the internet. Okay, so what should we do next? I think let's paint the white in the eyes and the collar here. I think that would work. So to do that, actually, let's just clean this brush before it hardens on me. Let's get a smallish brush. And I'm going to put a little bit of glazing fluid in here just to thin it out. Because the white on its own is pretty intense. So I'm going to take the white. I got white on my brush, and I'm going to mix in this glazing fluid. Quite a lot, actually. Because I want to try to I want to be able to manipulate how opaque or transparent this color is. So I just wiped some off because I want to try to keep these borders between the colors here. At least in this initial stage of the painting, because later on, you know, in the second, third layer, depending on how many you want to put on, I can paint right over and go right up to the edge. But if I leave, especially this first few layers, I leave a little bit of space in between each color, then it's more likely that some of that space will be preserved later on, and I'll have a little bit of a halo effect. Okay, so I can paint that there. So this figure is slowly kind of coming into focus. There's still a bunch more to do here, but we're making pretty good progress, especially with time. So we'll let that dry. Maybe it's a good time just to wash a few brushes. I wonder what Deborah was talking about when she was saying her new board. Is that skateboard or surfboard or paddle board? Upright, you know, one of those, is that what do they call those? Upright paddle boards you can stand on and paddle on, which is a lot of fun. That's a workout, though, if you've ever been on one. Okay, let's do the mouth next. So the mouth is going to be a warm red, and I'm going to put a touch of warm blue. That's more than a touch. There we actually not too bad. There we've spread it out a bit. That's going to make it more of like a bit more of like your blood red. Well, now it's getting deeper. It's almost going a little bit more magenta, right? Let's look here. How big of a... I think mine is tilted a little bit further to the side. That's all right. Okay. And you know, while I'm right here, it's not too much of a stretch just to take some of this. I'm going to take a little bit more blue and mix it into here. And just going to do the nostrils. And you know what? While I got it, I'm going to continue. So this is just the warm red and warm blue that I'm using. So it's kind of like a dirty purple, right? Because it's a purple, but it's not as intense as a purple would be if we were using magenta and blue. So it's got almost like a bit of a brownish quality. And I guess we could also do a tiny bit of outlining here with this same color. Mostly it's on the top eyelid. Maybe let's just zoom right in. Okay. Goodness, it's scared me. Just going over this a little bit. I kind of like this color. His goes much darker than this. But at least at the moment I'm kind of digging it. The eyes, anyway. Okay. So let's, maybe while we're right here, we're focusing on the eyes, let's do the green inside there. It's interesting the way that he's painted this. Usually what we would do is maybe have the darker color in the center where your pupils are and then paint the iris green or blue or whatever. It's an interesting little innovation he's got there. So to get that color, what I'm going to suggest is I'm going to start with cool blue and cool yellow. So we get this kind of bright green. Nice bright color. I'm going to put a little bit of warm blue into it, and that's going to desaturate it a little bit. So I think that should be good. Get a bunch of it off my brush. That mouth. a little bit crooked. But that'll, that's kind of, maybe we'll separate it from the two. So what should we do next? Maybe, you know what, I'm going to put more white on the eyes. Do another glaze of that. Let's just take my white. Remember, we had the glazing fluid, so just get a little bit more of that on there. So we still have, it's like these eyes have a little bit of like redness to them, which I think is actually great. I like that a lot. Remember, I'm painting this with some glazing fluid so that it's not a pure, thick, you know, totally opaque white. It's a little bit transparent, and so we're picking up some of the colors that were below there. Okay. Actually, you know what? While I'm right here, I'm just going to paint this white, or button. And then I'm gonna put yellow over top of it. Okay, I think maybe, what should we do? Maybe it's time to go back and do that background again. So if we zoom out. Eleanor says, my husband has dinner ready. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you, Eleanor. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Hope you have a good dinner. Okay, so then we're going to we can use this very similar color we did to last time. We're going to put some white in here, and I'm going to use some glazing fluid. So again, it's going to be a slightly transparent color. So let's get... I'm just going to actually put it right over top of here, and if I get a bit of yellow in it, that's all right. So put some white there. I'm going to put a bunch of glazing fluid in here. And yeah, I think that might be okay. So now I'm just going to take my brush and mix these in. Pick up a little bit of the color that was there before. But just a bit, not too much. Right, so I'm not going to dip into my yellow. Keeping it fairly simple here. In fact, I'm going to add even more glazing fluid to help give it just a little bit more transparency. I don't want to cover up everything that was there. Okay. So now we're getting much closer to the original. And yet we still have that kind of thing, the je ne sais quoi. Je ne sais pas quoi, right? Why is it je ne sais quoi? Because we'll just see little hints that there's something underneath there. Which, you know, is that perhaps that menacing quality that people may feel when they look at this painting. There's something there that isn't quite right. So mine's still a tiny bit darker. I think, you know, obviously, again, I put a lot of glazing fluid in there. So I could do another layer of this afterwards, potentially adding a lot more glazing fluid to make it almost transparent, completely transparent, if I wanted to get it even closer. But I think I'm going to be pretty happy with this. Again, it's going to probably dry a little bit darker. And I know there's some people who are going to be like, well, why not just use that color right off the top? Why even bother painting the red? Yeah, I'm sure it would look pretty good. But I really want to explore how Nara actually did it, right? This is a master study. I want to like really, I'm not really interested in replicating the painting or what it looks like. I'm more interested in the kind of the skills and the techniques that he used to create his painting. It is interesting looking at how this color really changes this painting, though. Like putting this little bit brighter white, it does soften what was kind of a little bit more of a sickly color, and maybe was a little bit too menacing of a quality, that now things are much more subtle effect. That's cool. So I mean, that's, as I said, pretty close. So the question is, little areas where it's a little bit patchy, do I want to do anything to it? I am in mind to do a little bit here and there, so I'm just going to blow dry that really quickly. And so to do this, I'm just going to add even more glazing fluid just so that it gets even more transparent. Because I don't want to put it a super opaque color over top, because then it's going to make everything else that isn't that thick. And then it's like an arms race. Now I got to go over the whole thing everywhere. All right, let's do a little bit more of that. It's kind of a nice effect. So take a bit of the paint, mostly glazing fluid. And we'll just... Alright, so I still see some of that patchiness, but I like that. I have more control over it, and I like some of that, because it hints that there's something underneath this color. Okay, so I think the background's done. So that kind of feels nice, right? Like we're slowly building it up. I know at various times people are like, oh, I don't know about this, but it's that careful, slow, more methodical approach, which I think is what makes his paintings kind of unique looking, especially when people try to copy his work and aren't really familiar with some of the techniques that we're using. Tea time. So, what should we do now? I'm going to paint this button while it's right here. I got some warm yellow. I'm just going to take warm yellow right out of the tube and just going to paint that. Heidi in the chat says, wow, what a baby. I'm still on the pumpkin. For those of you who don't know, we were painting the Yayoi Kusuma painting. I don't know if since I goofed on the beginning of today's episode, I'm not sure how much what I was talking about before or not, but this is the painting that I made this afternoon, based on Yayoi Kusuma's pumpkin from 2003. So if you want to do that, that video's up there on YouTube and Facebook, I guess, as well. So let's do the flesh tone. So we're gonna basically take a white and we're gonna mix, so we made this flesh tone before, and that was a very a little bit more of a brownish sandy color. We're gonna lighten it up significantly. We're gonna put a lot more white into it, but we're gonna also glaze. So we're gonna do the same thing we've just been doing. So let's mix this again. Let's take some warm yellow, take a little bit of warm red, and we'll mix this together. And we get our orange. We're going to take a little bit of blue. Take a little bit more blue. Okay. Actually, a little bit more red. Okay, we're going to use a lot of white. So we're basically at the color it was already, right? Which is great, but we need it to be much lighter. So let's just get some of the paint that's stuck inside the brush there out. Put a bit more white on the palette there. And then we're going to use a lot of glazing fluid. So we're just going to lighten it up. Okay, looks great. But then we're going to go lots of glazing fluid here, because this will allow me to control how dark or transparent or opaque this color actually gets. So I'm just going to mix all that glazing fluid in there. So we got about, I don't know, half and half glazing fluid in there. And you know, put a bit more glazing fluid. I'm going to take whatever white is left over here. So let me see. I wonder. Well, we'll see. There's only one way to find out, is just to do it. I have a feeling that I might want to, actually, I was going to say, I was feeling I wanted to be a little bit even lighter, but I think this will work. So where the forehead meets the hair, I'm going to be pretty easy on how close I get into here, just like he did. Like you can see where it's like in these edges here, kind of quite raw. Like he leaves a lot of that empty. Okay, and then as I go here, I can now go over top of these, of the white lines a bit, or the pink lines. So as I do this, it's gone a little bit, pale, right? A little pasty kind of. We will see when this dries. I have a feeling won't be so pasty when the color dries. But we can always, if we've gone too far in one direction, we just let it dry, and then we'll glaze, you know, a little bit of warmth or like reddish or something back into there. So now I can kind of go back right over, almost erase the red. Oops. Not entirely, Michael, but get rid of a bunch of it just by gently painting over it, not trying to hide it, and just there we go. Okay, so much closer to the original now, right? So we're slowly getting into the ballpark. So right now, I think she definitely feels very pale, but we're going to put, I think, a little bit of red back into her cheeks down here. We're going to darken around her legs a little bit. All slowly coming together. Wonder what we should do, but we're going to wait for all this to dry. Just softening an edge there. Okay. So what should we, let's do the brown of the hair next, or hopefully for the final time. So to do that, let's take this larger brush. I need some more warm yellow, not too much, but a little bit. So I take my warm yellow, get that on my brush. Warm red, oops, that was a lot. And some warm blue. Okay, let's just paint this in here. Actually, I'm going to go slightly smaller brush. depending on how thick your paint is, and you may have to do another layer, or it's up, I mean, who knows? I think one might be enough. I think he's gone back into the hair afterwards too and added a little bit of, you know, like lines where the hair kind of parts a bit up there. We'll see. So I think I didn't mix enough paint. Let's just do it again. And actually, I think it's a great idea to mix the paint as often as remixing paint. Great learning experience, and also it's going to just help give your paintings just a little bit more variety, because you'll have slightly different colors even in the hair, and of course no one's hair is, you know, all one entire solid color, right? That would look really weird. Okay. I don't mind it like that. I could see some people wanting another layer, so I think maybe we will just blast it, and I might do it a little bit in select areas just to... Okay. How do I feel about that? Pretty good. Paula says, don't forget to eat your chocolate bar or your energy bars. It's been a long day since 2 p.m. on. Or, was it 12:45, I think, when I began? Vancouver time. It's a chewy energy bar. Thank you, Paula, for reminding me to have a little food so I don't pass out. Okay. Next I'm going to do the dress again, because I think that could be throwing, you know, I'm happy with the way everything is going, but sometimes, you know, we could end up spending some time working on the eyes, and you're like, there's something wrong with the eyes. And you may not even realize it, but something like the color down here might be affecting the color up here. So when you're looking at it, and you keep doing things here, so I think this is important to kind of nail this before we move on. Hair, do I need any more hair? I think that's good. It is funny to me how it kind of bulged out a little bit on my version, and I guess kind of went behind her head, whereas it kind of seems to come a little bit over her forehead. Those are just little changes that get made when you're literally translating an image, right? Okay. So how do we make this color before? I think it was our cool blue, cool yellow, and some white. So where we can get away with this white that we used for glazing earlier. I think I need a little more. Okay, so I got some white here. I'm gonna mix this with some blue and some cool yellow. Now it's up to you. I kind of like this color a lot. Let's put a little more. More on the greener side. Let's put more. I think that's pretty close. Okay. I'm just going to use a little bit smaller brush to do. And then as we do this next coat, I can just trim in a little bit. In fact, let's do that again. I think maybe one thing that I hope is kind of evident is how often I'm using my fingers to sometimes just get in there and smudge things out of the way. It's if you want to paint and be really clean and never get your hands dirty, it's really tough to do that. I actually think it's one of my favorite things in the world is getting my fingers a little bit dirty as I paint. Especially considering how, you know, it's depending on what material you use, it's mostly non-toxic. Most acrylic paints that are commercially available are harmless. I mean, you don't want to be eating it or drinking it, but getting it on your fingers is not a problem, which was not the case, you know, even 50 years ago. It's pretty hard. I don't think in any art supply store will sell like really toxic paint anymore. You'd have to buy like the actual original pigments and mix them yourself, like cadmiums and all that. And all those things. I remember there was an art supply store in Los Angeles where I used to live that would sell that stuff. But it would not surprise me at all if all that stuff is now highly regulated. Because some of it is poisons, quite frankly. Like cadmium is super toxic. Okay. I went a little bit dark. I didn't even look at the screen. Mine is a little bit darker than the original. I could glaze on that and brighten it up if I wanted. I didn't even notice until I just looked now. That's all right, though. And as it dries, it's probably going to go a little bit darker even. Heidi says, the baby is coming, is really coming along. I have only gotten one line of black dots on the pumpkin. It is, you could spend a lot of time doing those dots. And it is, for some people, like, kind of addictive. Like, that's, I think, one of the great pleasures that Yayoi Kusuma has is doing all those little dots and taking her sweet time doing it. Just before I move on, see me, I like the way it looks right here, and then I go, oh, it's a little bit darker. Interesting. Okay, but I'm just going to move on from that. It does look like now that the more I look at it, that he's done a little bit of render. We could actually glaze that, no problem. On this side, we've got a bit of a highlight, so we've got a little bit more white here. So that could be kind of fun to add a little bit more texture. Okay, speaking of adding more white, let's go back and add. We'll continue on that area here. I mean, we are approaching, I would say, I always hate to estimate how much longer, but probably half an hour more of painting to finish this up. Why am I using a tiny brush for this? Not sure. Okay. So I took my white. Yeah, you should be careful, Michael. It's still drying. I just noticed there's a bit of yellow in this. If I want, I can add a yellow to the next layer of glaze. But again, I added glazing medium into the white here because I don't want it to be just, bright white, overpowering everything here. I want it to be quite subtle. It's white, but it's not like as white as it possibly could be. Same sort of thing with these eyes here. It's a little white, Michael, so it's a little intense. I was going to kind of blend it down, but it's going to turn to get at. Okay. I think I'm going to do a tiny bit of a glaze with this. So I'm going to take this white that I have. Let's take a bit of this here. Let's add a little more white. Take a bit of glazing fluid. Just put this here. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say? Okay, I was going to put a little bit. Okay, where did I say brush just to soften this up. Super subtle little effect here. Just to give a tiny bit more volume. So really I should be doing a bit more blow drying in between so I don't get any patches of paint that I pull up. That's pretty good. Just kind of a little subtle effect. Maybe while I'm right... Actually, no, this is green, so I don't want to add any more. I was going to put that on the skin, but that would suddenly make the skin kind of greenish. So we've got our flesh color here. This is the color we mixed earlier, so we still can use this. I'm going to take a bit more red. That's a lot of Michael. Let's just blend this in. We can get as subtle as you want. And then put some glazing fluid on it. Okay. And then we can go in here. Just gonna make it a little bit more rosy. Just bring some of that color back into the face that we lost a little bit of. Look how subtle of an effect that is. I don't know about you, but I can see it. Put a bit more on her cheek here. And then if you want, you can just use your mop brush just to make kind of blend it in a bit. Let's now take this same color. We'll just kind of use like this warmer thing just to give a little highlights on her arms. You want to be careful when you're doing this, obviously, not to smudge the color all over the background or her dress, etc., right? See, now I can go in and go over top of a little bit of this red that I left here is so it doesn't go completely away, nor do I want it to, right? Okay. Let's do this. Under her dress here. If you wanted to outline things, you could also use maybe a little bit of purple is probably what I would use. Kind of mix a little bit of blue into this color we're using right now. We'll see if I need to use it. Okay. So actually, let's just blend this in. I think I'm going to go a little bit darker down in here. We could darken these up here in the eyes a tad. I don't mind it like this. I'm getting pretty happy with where things are, but let's see. So I'm just going to take the same color, get a little bit more red on there. Okay. Just blend this out carefully. Little heavy-handed there. It's pretty subtle, but I think I might even have to go in here and just tone that down just a bit. Before I do that, I'm just going to add a little bit of blue into this. Again, that's a lot, so I'll just dilute this. It's kind of a little overboard, so just blend it out a bit. And kind of just darken that whole arm just a bit there. It's a little bit pink. Okay, now I'm kind of going a little far, right? Okay, tone it down, Michael. So if you do that, that's no problem. Let's just, I'm going to brighten a bit of this up, actually. Or do I? Do I want to do that? Let's see. don't know. I might be pretty close to being done here. I'm not super happy with a little bit of that, but at some point you just go like, you know what? If I keep on fiddling with it, I could be asking myself for a lot of trouble here. Okay, I think the last thing I want to do is her eyes and just brighten up that green ever so slightly. So let's just take some cool yellow, cool blue. I might just take I was going to put some white in here, but let's just see what this looks like. Oh, and I forgot the nostrils. So, almost done here. And I've got a brush that looks like it escaped somewhere. Oh, there it is. How did that get there? Not sure. So that color is a purple. So we mixed our warm red and blue and warm blue together. So we got a kind of a dirty purple, as I said before. And okay. Do I want to do any glazing on the eye just to darken that a bit? Okay, let me do that then. Just one. This will be the last thing that I'll do. Unless I make some huge boo-boo somewhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this brown that I just mixed. Alright, I'm just taking the glazing fluid, putting it on my brush. And just like literally a tiny dab of it. And then I'm actually just going to, so I got that on my brush, I'm actually just going to wipe it off. And then go back here, get a little bit more on my brush. Because I want to be able to control this really like, so I can go in here and now glaze just a subtle little bit of color, like the effect of the eyelids casting a little shadow. It is like almost, I can see it here in person, but it is very subtle effect. So let's just blow dry it. I might do it a tiny bit more. This time I'm just going to do it closer to the top. There, that's certainly helping to give a little bit more of a, maybe more menacing quality. Okay. So, I think I'm happy with that. I think I'm pretty happy with that. So I did a 2.5 hour long episode, of which the first half hour was missing. So later tonight I will try to upload the full length version. I didn't even really think about it that this painting was made in 1995. Interesting. One of the things that I didn't even mention when I was talking about Nara is he is very closely identified with Takashi Murakami as part of a movement that is really Murakami's baby, which is this whole idea of super flat. In fact, let me just, before I wind up for the night, let me see, does there super flat mentioned in here? Let's punch this. Actually, let's go to Yeah, so this is the movement super flat, which is a Takashi Murakami influence thing. But yeah, you can see here super flat artist Yoshitomo Nara is a part of it, but really it's a Murakami thing. And the idea is, I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with anime and manga. Remember I was saying that there is this element of those, that media that at least Murakami would describe as flat, as like super flat, that's kind of superficial in a way. Not to denigrate it, but that's because that's actually something he wanted. He wanted something that was very graphic, I guess, that, like that, empty, like he talks about like being the shallow emptiness of Japanese consumer culture, and to kind of the Japanese pop art of the late 90s, early 2000s would have this super flat quality. Kind of some very similar kind of ideas that Andy Warhol had. And Murakami, of course, is probably the closest thing we have to, he would definitely be the person who would be carrying on the Warholian tradition of obviously taking images from pop culture and reappropriating them into high culture, art culture. And Warhol was often, he would make these pronouncements that there was nothing to see, that he was just a blank, an empty vessel, I guess. Anyway, I just thought it's funny to me that it's not actually mentioned, Superflat, it's not mentioned in Yoshitomo Nara's actual bio here on Wikipedia, even though for a period of time at the end of the 90s, early 2000s, Superflat was like this wave that hit California, where I was living at the time. Anyway, so that was a pretty cool painting to make. I'm really excited to be able to paint a Nara painting. I think this one will probably go in our daughter's bedroom. Even though, again, there's people would say it's a menacing kind of character. I think it's there's far more menacing things in this world that I would have no problem our daughter seeing this and being around this kind of a painting throughout her childhood. I think some of those ideas are way over her head. She's not even 2 years old yet. She's not thinking about all the subtext involved in super flat and all that kind of stuff, right? Okay, everyone. So, what's today is Tuesday. I don't even. What are we doing on our next episode is. Wu Ganzong. Okay, so we're going to look at one of the greatest, well, he died not too long ago, but one of the greatest modern contemporary Chinese artists of all time on Thursday. We're going to paint his interpretation of the Great Wall of China. That's going to be cool. And he probably is not well known here in Canada or United States, but again, in China is like, or was, because he's no longer alive, but when he was alive, and his reputation now is ginormous. He's probably about as close to as you could get to like not a Warhol, like a Picasso-like figure looming over Chinese modern and contemporary art. So we'll take a look at him on Thursday. That's super exciting. I can't wait to do very different painting than anything we've done really in a while. Yeah, I have to actually think about how we're going to do that one. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for another one of our episodes. I'll upload the full version of this later on this evening, and Those of you who are interested can go back and watch the first half hour. Okay, everybody, enjoy your time. And if you want to, please like and subscribe to the channel. You want to leave a donation to help support the channel, there is a link to the PayPal below, as well as if you want to send an e-transfer or whatever, contact me through the Facebook or through my website, and those links are there below. Okay, so we will see you. I'd love to see your version of the painting uploaded to the Facebook group. Join the Facebook group. We'll talk to you soon, everybody. Good night.